Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Lauren Murphy of being foreign and girthy, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you after UFC Lewis versus, what was this guy's name? Teixeira, don't need to remember that next time. An event people are describing as, oh, this is right, actually. And I would agree with them. Main event was heavyweight slop. Many of the other fights were heavyweight slop. There was some light heavyweight slop in there, but there was also some good stuff hidden in there. And mercifully, the heavyweights slopped it up in short increments. Don't mind a heavyweight fight as long as it ends fairly quickly. The fights we expected to be good, Steve Garcia versus Calvin Kattar, Morgan Charriere versus Nate Landwehr, were good. Let's jump straight into it. Main event, Derek Lewis versus Teixeira. I was very charitable to Teixeira in the preview of this. I was going, well, you know, I did see him get clattered on the Contender Series, trying to do a shoulder roll and doing it badly for technical reasons that we got into on that show, but you don't really need to know that. Actually, we'll talk about it when Derek Lewis gets there. But I was like, he is 6'8" and he is trying things, which I appreciate greatly. But all of this, because it's a Derek Lewis main event and because this guy's largely untested, there's an undercurrent of, but he might get memed. He might get memed in the first round. He might do well for the first round and get memed in the second. And then Derek Lewis will... I was very optimistic, actually, because I said Derek Lewis will invent a new meme. And he didn't. He just did the old ones. But, you know, Balls was hot. Sells out stadiums still, it seems. This dude might be on the cusp of a title shot at Tom Aspinall, based on being the most known MMA fighter, well, probably outside Conor McGregor. But Teixeira comes out, does what he do, be a long, tall man and jab with your chin up in the air and your right hand down by your nips, but nonetheless came out and jabbed, got Derek Lewis right in the eye immediately, and respect to Derek Lewis because he's done this a few times now. He seems to, I don't think he pretends to be hurt when he's hit. I think he does get hurt, and then he goes, I can make the most of this, and pretends it's worse than it is. And then guys rush in on him and he just tries to chin him. And he, fortunately for Teixeira, he missed on the first attempt. He tried to throw the right hand across the top of the jab, but 6'8" to 6'4" is still, 4 inches of height plus whatever reach, 80-inch reach on Teixeira. If you don't know, height and reach factor into a range advantage in punching, because if you're punching up at someone, you effectively lose reach. My old experiment that I always tell you to do is go and stand in front of a wall, put your arm out at shoulder height, get close enough to the wall that your fingertips brush it, and then raise it up 4 inches. And you'll find that you can't reach as far. And it can work the other way. If you lower your hand 4 inches down from there, you'll realise that as a taller fighter, certainly in boxing and in boxing exchanges, it often helps you to get your shoulders down, to get down in your stance and get your shoulder level with the opponent's face. But when you're talking about like a 4-inch height advantage, normally the height advantage you would need to really focus on getting lower to get the guy level with your shoulder would be really extreme. We're talking like Vitaly Klitschko versus 6 foot even guys. But anyways, Lewis swings across the top of the jab, throws the right hand across the top of the jab. I think he clipped him on the first one and then followed him. And he ended up, like Teixeira backs up and pumps out a jab and gets left hooked on the chin at the same time, which is crazy. That should not be happening. And if you go back and look at it, obviously his glove's a bit low, but just generally, because you would have to swing the left hook so straight-armed for it to be the same length as a jab, probably shouldn't really be happening. But he got clipped, went down, Lewis swarmed on him, and Teixeira, to his credit, did some good work to sort of survive. He passed Lewis's leg across his head as he was sort of trying to mount him and came out the back door, clawed his way up along the fence, both hands in the cage illegally. And then people complained about the stoppage because it was one where the ref let the guy get back to his feet and then turn around and re-engage, and then was like, that's enough, I've seen enough. But if you're using both hands to like pull yourself up off the floor, I think, we can probably say that you probably weren't with it and maybe the fight should have been stopped. But Derek Lewis, man, he is the crab. This division is crabs in a bucket, but everyone else is trying to get out. And Derek Lewis is a giant crab at the bottom going, you think you're better than me? We're all trash, and pulling him back in. But fair play to him. He does entertaining things, and he's been doing it for a long time against... But I said this on the boycast, but if you're not genuinely elite, he's going to, it's not a form of athleticism that will get you into the NFL or whatever, but he has raw assets in terms of his power and durability and a certain type of craftiness that mean he will just physically check you from advancing in the heavyweight division. And we joke about him giving up in fights, and that's really more a conditioning thing, because toughness, he's actually one of the better heavyweights. Co-main was Gabriel Bonfim. Side note, the situation where only the main event gets to be a 5-rounder, they should just, there's no reason that should be. Just change it for Derek Lewis cards. Have the main event be a 3-rounder and then the co-main event be a 5-rounder. Because if a Derek Lewis fight goes 5 rounds, something's gone horribly wrong. And people, I guarantee people have already left the arena before you complete those 5 rounds. But Bonfim versus Stephen Thompson. This was Bonfim. There's a few matches on this card that are just sort of layups. The guy fighting Austin Lane, the guy Mike Davis got to fight. But there were also these two sort of like old man, get out there, young guy, and get a recognizable name on your record. And Steve Garcia versus Calvin Kattar is one of those. And Gabriel Bonfim versus Stephen Thompson was supposed to be one of those. He did win, but man, was it not convincing. And Stephen Thompson, as washed as he is, actually looked pretty good for himself. He did that in the Kevin Holland fight. But when I say Stephen Thompson's washed, and I say it a lot, even though I love him, I realize that his prime is probably so long ago. Maybe like 10 years now. Because I was writing at Fightland during his peak. And the average MMA fan's lifespan is 5 years. So we're 2 MMA generations removed from Stephen Wonderboy Thompson's prime. But if you saw him in his prime, one of the things that one of the sort of intangible things that kept him head and shoulders above every other striker who crosses over and tries to do well in a division full of wrestlers at his time was his ring awareness and his positioning. If you watch prime Stephen Thompson, his back foot didn't touch the fence for more than a split second. He was the hell out of dodge. He was everywhere except where you wanted him to be. And I remember that was sort of at his peak with the fights against Johnny Hendricks and Rory McDonald. The Rory McDonald one was crazy because I think that went the full 5 rounds. And McDonald was just lost in there. He'd been so scary up to that point, and then he just couldn't land a glove on Stephen Thompson, and he couldn't get him into a wrestling exchange along the fence because he never got him close to the fence. So by the end, he's trying Imanari rolls and shit. So when I say that Wonderboy's washed, look at his current fights and look how many times he's not even just pushed to the fence, when he's standing in front of the fence and looking at his opponent and waiting for them. Because that is not what he used to do. And it meant that Shavkat, Bilal, Gilbert Burns, Buckley, all could take advantage of that. I mean, Buckley just ran at him swinging over and over again, and eventually he got caught along the fence enough that he got clattered. But the other 3 just pushed into the fence and wrestled. Which is why it was crazy. The start of this fight, they come out and Gabriel Bonfim immediately gives up the center of the cage to Wonderboy. And I went, that's interesting. Wonder if that will change in a minute. And lo and behold, the fight continues, and he never makes a conscious effort to put, he does bursts of pushing Wonderboy back, but then he'll go back to this long distance kickboxing match where if you have eyes, he's losing. If you're a judge, he won apparently, but it was really weird because he did want to take him down along the fence, and he's shooting these singles from way out in the open and crawling into Wonderboy along the fence, and Wonderboy's hitting the fence with no momentum, no being stumbling over himself, just hitting the fence and going, cool, I can hold myself up here all day. Basically. I mean, he did get taken down a couple of times, but he just sprung back up. And that's the curious thing about Wonderboy, because as an old man, he's still got pretty strong wrestling defensively. It's just that he can't get himself out of the position. He can't get off the fence. So, and when he does get off the fence, he immediately puts himself back on the fence because of his footwork and his ring awareness being shot. So, that was really weird. Landed a couple of good high kicks in this one. The other aspect that you can see he's sort of shot in is that we're going to talk about this with Nate Landwehr, but when you sort of blitz in throwing straight punches, if you don't then immediately move your head, which Stephen Thompson tends not to, and you don't step out the side door, the other guy will hit you coming back immediately. And Stephen Thompson's doing the running flurries of straight punches, the old karate rush, they used to call it in the Pacific War. But that was just dudes with empty weapons running at you. But that blitzing in with straight punches pumped from the chest, that will get you counted if you aren't very, very quick and if you don't time it very, very well. And that happened a good few times in this fight. The other thing that Stephen Thompson does loads now is try to counter going backwards. He tries to sort of sit on his blows a bit more while he's retreating. It just meant that Buckley kept crashing into him. Buckley's got horrible accuracy on his punches. He's working at 30% for his career of significant strikes landed, which Stats aren't often that important, but that stat is absolutely glaring. It's 10% lower than basically everyone in the UFC's top 20 at welterweight. He wastes a lot of punches, and he finally got Wonderboy. But the amount of times they crashed together like chest to chest, or his arms were swinging into Wonderboy's guard, while Wonderboy was just sort of standing there in front of him trying to counter going backwards, was crazy. So Bonfim got the decision, but man, was I not impressed. Oh, the other thing that was really cool in this fight, aside from the kicks to the head, and some old school Wonderboy magic, you got to see that sort of horse stance, the side kick to the body, and then that paired with the hook kick to the head, which is beautiful. The old Bill Wallace. In fact, Wonderboy's been not great for so long that I don't think I've mentioned Bill Wallace on the podcast recently. But if you want to see someone do what Wonderboy does with his lead leg, it's largely based off what Bill Wallace used to do in American kickboxing. This was before before kickboxing met Muay Thai and they allowed kicks below the waist. Bill Wallace had a badly injured right leg, I think it was. So he learned to kick almost exclusively with his left leg. So he'd pick up his knee and then he'd either go side kick, hook kick, or round kick from the same position, from the same chamber. And you can watch his fights on YouTube. Like, he was a tough son of a bitch, because the other thing that he had was a great left hook, which made for a really weird sort of style, because he'd use cross guard and then he'd throw the left hook and he'd be sort of brawling with you on the inside, and then you'd step back and just this foot would come up out of nowhere and kick you across the top of the head and you'd end up unconscious. He used to be able to do things like take a lit cigarette out of someone's mouth with his toes. All sorts of stupid tricks like that. But very legit, Bill Wallace, and the commentator on the very first UFC event. So you got some classic Wonderboy kicking. He landed a good wheel kick when he had Bonfim against the fence, which was crazy, because how often do you see Wonderboy working the guy along the fence? And then I really liked his back escape, which we're going to talk about. I mean, we talk about it every week, but guys getting on your back, and Junior Tafa, should be thinking about this, and Austin Lane too. But in MMA, there's this sort of epidemic of guys dying from rear naked choke when they're along the fence because they're desperate to hold themselves up. Chidi Njokwani, Jake Matthews jumped on his back and he decided to try and stand up and run for the fence. It's like, once you're on your back, just turn so that he's on the bottom. When someone's backpacking you, if you're looking up at the ceiling and they're underneath you, they don't have any strikes. They have one move, well, two maybe. They've got an arm bar there, but you have to change position to do that. So they've got one move, which is choking you. And they got gloves on, which are the equivalent of those Q-tip things they used to fight with on gladiators. So you can just grab the bottom of those. And it makes it really hard to finish chokes from the back. Like, aside from maybe Pantoja, Damian Maia used to be good at it, but he retired like 5 years ago. Not a lot of guys good at finishing from that position. But I see guys all the time. There's like an epidemic of guys not being able to defend themselves when the opponent, like in sort of jiu-jitsu-y positions, because everyone's so used to wall walking. But one of the great escapes for back control from MMA, which was developed in MMA and then went over to jiu-jitsu and nogi, is to you hold the choking hand, you try and put it into your armpit on the opposite side so you can clamp down on it, and then you try and get up onto your knees and free the hook on the opposite side, and they just fall off. And you saw in this fight, Bonfim was on Wonderboy's back along the fence, but he only had one hook in and he had his feet crossed so that his knees were pinching on Wonderboy's hip on the opposite side. So Wonderboy puts one foot on the ground, gets up to one knee. He's keeping that hook out with his knee being up. And then he does a little, he lifts himself up and drops, and the bump rolls Bonfim off the back of him and to under him. It's really cool. And that's the difference between winning and losing in MMA. Being on the guy's back and him just sliding your hips around him slightly. And then you're underneath him. And it's not just Slacky J, hobbyist grappler, talking about this. Henry Akins has talked about this. I think William from Open Note Grappling's talked about this. I think BJJ Scout talked about this back in the day. But it's the back is a very deceptive position, which I suppose brings us to that Tuco Tokkos Junior Tafa fight, because I was watching the end of that, and basically Tokkos is on Tafa's back, and Tafa's holding his the choking hand, and he just sort of lets Tokkos pull it out from underneath him, because to get on top of someone from the back, you have to get up on your elbow. Not really any other ways that that's happening. So if the guy's holding on to your choking arm, it's very hard to do. But Tafa's holding onto it, and then he just lets it go over his shoulder, and Tokkos gets on top. I don't remember if it was the exact same thing happened to Austin Lane, but man, Austin Lane versus Vitor Petrino, that was a layup as well. But respect to Vitor Petrino, because he was supposed to knock Austin Lane out, because Austin Lane, what he does is he comes out and throws long side kicks, and you go, oh, giant athletic guy throwing long kicks and trying to keep the guy on the outside. That's a good heavyweight prospect right there. And then as soon as he misses one, he gets chinned and collapses. He has no chin at all. But as I said, it turns out he's got a second chin, and it's his ground game. He was underneath Vitor Petrino for most of this round. I mean, he threw a kick, it got parried across him, and he got thrown to the mat, which will happen if you throw lots of kicks. It happens all the time in Muay Thai. But he ended up in the turtle, which is like not the end of the world. That's where you grab the wrists and you build up. But he just sort of laid there and then let Petrino squash him, despite being significantly bigger than Petrino, straight into mount. And then as Petrino got higher and higher on his body, he didn't do anything. So once the guy gets high up, he's off your hips, your bridge doesn't mean as much. And then, when you're getting desperate and the guy's high up, that's when you should be either like locking your arms around his waist to stall, or hands in the armpits, push him overhead, try and get your feet in his armpits and do the old self-suck escape that Felipe Lima did against Peyton Talbot the other week. But instead, Austin Lane sort of puts one hand out and tries to turn on his side. And it makes you realise, people laugh at Derek Lewis, but he's very good at getting up off the bottom for the most part, or at least good enough. Jailton Almeida is actually a very good top player, and Derek Lewis spent 5 rounds underneath him, constantly trying to get back up. The one in the first round that I always reference because he did exactly the same thing to anyone who's mounted him. Derek Lewis bridges and rolls, doesn't care where your hands are, because he knows if he bridges and rolls, he'll get to his stomach and you'll probably put your hands on the mat to base. And then he grabs a wrist with 2 hands and rolls all the way through so that you're on his back now. He's put you on his back, but now you're underneath him, where you can't hurt him. You might strangle him, but it's going to be work. And you're both agreed on what you're trying to do now. There's no surprises. There's no getting caught with a quick elbow or a punch that you don't see. So what I'm saying is watching the rest of these heavyweights makes me appreciate Derek Lewis even more, to be honest. Actually, on the subject of heavyweights, Walter Walker. Pick one and stick with it. If you're Walter Walker or Walter Walker, that's fine. But Walter Walker is hard. 3rd leg lock win in the UFC, I believe, or in his career. Hold on. Yeah, three heel hooks back to back. I get it's just a blind spot in these heavyweights. They aren't very good. The thing is, it can be a great equalizer. The leg locking game will always reference the Lachlan Giles ADCC run where he went out in the first round of his own division, under 77 kilos, took part in the absolute, took on the winner of the heaviest division in the first round, and immediately heel hooked him, and then heel hooked 2 other giants in that competition. The heel hook can be the great equalizer, but if you've got a giant guy, say like an Austin Lane sized guy in your gym, can be hard to just even get anything working because all the proportions are off. Dudes with real long legs. But that's just me giving these guys an excuse. People are always like, well, maybe they don't have a lot of training partners that size. Respect to Tom Aspinall's dad, because what he did was there aren't a lot of 250-pound lads who are good at fighting around, certainly in the UK. So what he does is he has a sparring day every month or so where they get all the best European heavyweights to come over as well. And they were all having a great laugh. It was him, Phil DeFree, Mick Parkin. Mick Parkin trains with him, but Phil DeFree is somewhere else in England. A couple of the big giant Euro guys. And apparently they've been doing that since before Aspinall was the number 1 contender. They've been making sure that they're getting giant guys who know what they're doing more than most giant guys. When you're considering Fedor Emelianenko or Cain Velasquez or the smaller heavyweights who have done very, very well in a division that is not quite absolute because there's a top end to it in the UFC, but effectively you're fighting 300-pound men. When you're talking about the guys who were 230, 240 and probably didn't cut much weight, if they cut at all, and had success there, a lot of it is toughness, sort of a mental toughness, where a lot of these big guys fold if they meet adversity, and the ability to get out of bad positions. And a lot of these guys are the biggest guy from their gym, and they're the biggest guy in most of the fights they get into, and then they meet someone who puts them in a little bit of adversity and they just crumble. But Walter Walker against Kennedy Nzechukwu. Nzechukwu was actually sort of the opposite end of that because he came up from light heavyweight and he's actually looked all right as a heavyweight. He's one of the guys who's done it decently, whereas guys like Ryan Spann have just gone, I'll stop caring about my diet. Things look worse up there. But Volker got on Nzechukwu immediately. He ran at him with his head down. Absolutely trash takedown attempt. But then he eventually got hold of him, worked his way to a back body lock, and then he pulled a move that Palhares used to do back in the day. I think Shogun Hua did it in one of the Vale Tudo fights of his early career. When you got the back body lock, you put a leg through the middle, you throw it over into 50-50. And the great thing about it is that you're going like hamstring leg press into the inside of their knee, turning it out, which is a very strong off balance. So even if you don't knock the guy over, you've probably lifted his foot off the floor momentarily, so you can snatch the heel hook attempt, which is always good in 50-50. If you move into the 50-50 and you're already working on the leg while you're getting there, it's not strictly a 50-50 anymore. But you do see some guys in competition get horribly heel hooked by the standing guy in these standing versus grounded 50-50 situations. Josias Cavalcante did a horrible one a couple of years ago. Just tore the guy's legs straight off. But yeah, good for Volker. I think he had an inside heel hook and an outside heel hook on his UFC record now, which is quite cool. Don't know how the grappling is going to play out if that's how he chooses to engage with people, but it's certainly a better style for longevity than trying to be a striker at heavyweight, it seems. You know, someone like Sergey Spivak can do this forever. But then Derek Lewis, I suppose. But is he really a striker? I feel like Derek Lewis is more of like an awkward anti-grappler brawler. If there's 100 strikes being thrown on the feet in a fight, he's not doing what he wants. The fight ain't going his way. Anyway, what else was on this card? Oh, well, let's do the good fights. Steve Garcia versus Calvin Kattar. I thought Steve Garcia looked great. We were sort of waiting for Steve Garcia against someone like a good measuring stick. He was on a really good run. It was 5 in a row, going back to his lightweight days, which ended when he fought Mahashate. He came down, he stopped Chase Hooper, who somehow has got like more traction than him, even though Steve Garcia stopped him. Then some lad whose name I can't say, Melky Costa, who's a very tough opponent and done really well recently. Sungwoo Choi and Kyle Nelson. There was sort of like, in some of those fights, particularly the Nelson one, there was a degree of sort of surviving and dogging his way through. Or just overwhelming the guy really early in like a wildfire fight. So Calvin Kattar, tough as nails, decent technical striker, even in his older days. It was going to be interesting to see what happened to Steve Garcia as the fight went on. And he looked really good. This was probably the best showing of his career, in my eyes. Calvin Kattar is very much on the downward slope now. And I think his sort of worst instincts were played out in this fight. He was standing there trying to do the shoulder roll with the high elbow presented and stuff, which I think is great. It's a great way to deflect punches. But the point of doing that is to deflect punches and stay close enough that you can then counter. And Kattar was not countering at all. He'd throw the odd overhand, sway way out of position. Garcia would duck under it and then hit him with 2 left hands on the counter. The one cool thing Kattar did do was he parried a jab into the sort of low lead arm shoulder roll position, and then he just elbowed him. I think he caught him in the neck, which is not ideal because forearm to the neck elbows are the ones that the Thais do in play sparring so that they can elbow each other. They just elbow each other in the neck, not with the elbow. But I've been saying for years, I love the low lead hand sort of shoulder rolly position. Ideally, shoulder roll a punch or whatever, but coming back with elbows. And the 2 people I've seen do it are Anderson Silva, which you're like, yeah, that makes sense, and Brian Ortega, where you go, really? Brian Ortega did some slick inside boxing to elbows with defense. I mean, that's the main surprising part, with defense. And he did, yeah. If you watch Silva versus Bisping, firstly, a boxing lesson by Michael Bisping. His fistic majesty boxed up Anderson Silva that night. But there were some nice shoulder rolls into backup elbows, the kind that Silva used to knock out Tony Frickland. Which, if you've never seen, I guess there's going to be a number of people on this podcast haven't seen that. Go watch it. It's phenomenal. So I loved what Garcia was doing. I really liked... He's the most successful male fighter out of Jackson Wink now. Certainly active. You know, they had John Jones for a long time, but there was a time when Jackson Wink was the place to be for MMA fighters. And I think that sort of reflected the need for bodies. The most important thing for anyone trying to get better at fighting is to be able to spar with other good fighters. And people would go, it was the classic, like, oh, I've lost a fight, I'll go to Jackson Wink. And it wasn't necessarily that Greg Jackson and Mike Winklejohn were the best coaches in the world, but you had access to a lot of the best fighters in the world. But a lot of Jackson Wink trained fighters, particularly Mike Winklejohn trained strikers, they sort of introduced the side kick to the lead leg and the oblique kick. They did a lot of that. They'd have Greg Jackson used to give you a certain number of low kicks that you would land in a round. He was really into that sort of stuff, like that level of game planning. So they fight in this sort of characteristic, some say robot-y sort of way. But it was interesting to see Steve Garcia having success with it. I really liked when he was going, he was the southpaw, so he'd go left high kick and then 2 left body kicks. Both of the body kicks after that, he'd be throwing his head back and looking up, which is something Yuki Yosa does a lot. So you know it hit with me. But doing the head whip like you're going to throw a high kick, because people do that. They look up. They expand their whole front of their body to make room to throw that high kick. You do that and then you kick low or to the body, and it just throws people for a loop every time. It's the wine-sniffing striker's alternative to look low, kick high. You look high, kick low. And actually, I didn't mention this about Wonderboy, but I love... He threw it occasionally through his career. He threw it a couple of times against Johnny Hendricks. The sort of triangle kick, the Sankakugere, which is a front snap kick delivered on an angle. So it's not quite a round kick, it's not quite a straight kick. It comes up on an angle, and it can result in you kicking an elbow. So it's a little bit risky. Very common in Kyokushin styles. They call it Mikazukigeri, the crescent kick. But seeing Wonderboy have success with that against Bonfim was really nice. And Garcia, the knockdown in the third round, was sort of the summary of why Garcia is effective. He's kind of meat and potatoes, but with some weird stuff thrown in. And that is basically the most effective way to build a striker. He has Kattar along the fence. He starts lunging in and winding up his left hand behind him like he's going to throw a bolo punch. And then he brings it back in as if to say, I'm not throwing. And then he steps through and hits him with the left hand anyway. He hit a couple of really nice shifting left hands in this one. And I'm going to do something about that this week, probably a Filthy Casuals guide, like a little one, just on the Dustin Poirier shift, because I think that's the biggest thing that Dustin Poirier has left the sport with. Ideally, every young fighter would watch Dustin Poirier and work out that when he started to learn how to shoulder roll, he became a lot more comfortable in the pocket, and then he could stand there and pick his openings. But most of them are not going to get that. Most of them will probably get that when he landed his best punch, it was from southpaw, he'd go left straight, which would fall short, step through and left jab, so he's doubled his left hand, and then an overhand right. He's a southpaw whose best punch is the orthodox overhand right. And he sets it up with this double jab that is left straight to left jab because he steps with it. And Steve Garcia was having loads of success with that in this fight. He was just using it on his own, left straight to left jab. And then Morgan Charriere versus Nate Landwehr. I think Nate Landwehr is going to make a really interesting study at some point. I'll do either a video or an article about him. Because he sort of traded on his durability for a lot of his career. Certainly if you go back and watch those M1 fights, he's just taking blows. And he's not a monstrous hitter. So he's just sort of wearing guys down. But in the UFC, his chin has sort of cracked. And he's also run up against guys where he doesn't feel comfortable doing that. If you watch his fight with Dan Ige, he visibly gets sort of shaken by what's coming back at him. And he's often left with this thing like in the Do Ho Choi fight where he's fighting someone who's hitting a lot harder than him. He doesn't like it, but he's got to try and get in on them. And his way of doing that has been to put his fingertips on the top of his head, make a little ramp with his forearms so his elbows are out in front of him, and walk forwards. And he doesn't move his head much, and he gets hit a lot. But he's picked up a few things that make him quite tricky, like the thing that was catching Morgan Charriere a lot and making him swing kicks at air was that after Charriere had landed a few good calf kicks, Nate Landwehr just started doing false entries, which is how he threw off Ludovic Klein, who's a very good striker, and David Onama, who's a very good striker. He would walk towards them, step, plant his foot, and then push back off it. So it looks as if he's stepping in to engage, but he's actually backing up. And then guys swing and miss at him. And what it does is it tires you out if you're trying to aim for big counter punches. If you're throwing low kicks on the back foot, you're going to end up way out of position and he's going to swarm in on you. And the thing about good strikers is that they don't like missing. They don't like giving you openings and they don't like wasting energy. So that it sort of makes guys shell up and then he can continue walking them down. The other thing that really surprises me about him quite often is his hand speed. His jab and a right hand lead, a straight right, off the bat. Both of them landing freely on Morgan Charriere in this fight. And Charriere has been a highly touted striker for ages. But this is one of those fights where it was an example of, everyone says speed kills and being beaten to the punch and stuff like that. And yeah, speed is probably one of the most important assets in fighting and boxing. But every good fighter, when they get hit, they hit back. they're not even thinking about it. They just hit back. Because if it's like how the shoulder roll works, if you're close enough to be hit, you are close enough to hit the opponent, unless you are a normal sized person fighting Talus and Teixeira. And a good rule is if they hit you with a power shot, not a jab. With a jab, they can be on the way out before you even start throwing back. But if they hit you with a power shot, you are close enough to hit them. But what Nate Landwehr's doing is like he's doing the jab and falling in, so he's always going to be there to be hit, but he throws the right straight and falls in, but his head never moves. He'll move his head between engagements, but after he punches, he goes straight forward. And that is the purpose of the double end bag. If you watch guys on the double end bag, you can watch Floyd Mayweather. I'm convinced Floyd Mayweather's training footage is just to troll people into doing the wrong thing, but there'll be guys doing like 11 punch combinations on a double end bag that's so tightly strung that it doesn't come back at them. But the traditional use of the double end bag is that you punch it with 1 or 2 or a 1-2, and you move immediately so that when the bag swings back at you, you're out of the way. Which seems like it wouldn't take a lot of skill, but it's not like the test is not in the single skill. The test is in being able to do that naturally, automatically against an opponent for however many rounds. And we talk all the time about like the jab and dip and how punching and then moving your head is what keeps you close enough to counter the guy as he comes back at you. And that's where you get your really powerful, dangerous punches landing. But Nate Landwehr lands that first punch and then he's just like, oh, I better throw some more punches. And he's just standing there with his head straight in front of Morgan Charriere, and Morgan Charriere's hitting him back harder. But respect to Nate Landwehr because he grit through and started taking over in that second round. And then Morgan Charriere, his corner clearly fired him up because he came out for the third round and said, right, I'm stopping this here. And what was I saying all through the pre-fight stuff? I was saying this is one of those fights where I could see Morgan Charriere having an awful time because, like Onama and Ludovic Klein, he likes, he knows he's the better striker in terms of cleanness and mechanics, and a lot of guys get hung up on like what their accolades and their technical skills should get them in a fight, and then as soon as someone's just in their face going, no, I'm going to put my hands all over you, they sort of freeze up and they throw less and less and less, and they get put into this weird shell. And then they're in the third round, and it's like, you got to dig this out of the hole now. You got to swing for the fences on every punch. And if you're getting put on the back foot the whole time, that's exhausting, and also your accuracy is going to suffer as a result. But Morgan Charriere fought Nathaniel Wood, who's a much cleaner striker, but certainly not like in your face all the time like Nate Landwehr. But in that fight, Morgan Charriere was good when he went, but he just didn't go enough. So it was really nice to see him realize that in this fight, because he was still the victim of, like, certainly in the end of that second round, not throwing enough. And then in the third round, he came out and said, right, got to get something done now. So at some point, I'll do something about Landwehr because I find him really interesting as a flawed fighter because, if we were only interested in wins and losses and nothing else, the only people you would be able to enjoy would be like Khabib and John Jones. But the most interesting thing in all of fighting for me is when people have a really obvious flaw and they find ways around it. Or guys who improve really rapidly. That's why the lightweight division's so fun. You've got Oliveira, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, all guys who were sort of set in their ways, we thought, and then they changed it up and became much better technically. Oh, and then my boy Chidi Nzechukwu lost. Came in massively overweight, apparently, and then they said that he made weight, but they didn't have footage of him making weight, and they deleted the footage of him missing weight. Which was like, why? I don't understand why you do that, because it then makes people freak out. But equally, I don't understand freaking out because it's Chidi Nzechukwu. It's not like he gets a lot of favoritism from the UFC. And if he missed weight, I imagine Jake Matthews would just take this fight and 20% of his purse. But Chidi's missed weight like 6 or 7 times now. But this one doesn't go down as an official weight miss. Apparently he did make it. They just handled it in a really cack-handed way that made people go conspiracy theory mode. But I like Matthews in this fight. Like, he tried to crowd Chidi, and then Chidi reached for him and he hit him with a collar-tie uppercut, which is great because I'm always saying Chidi Nzechukwu has some of the best use of dirty boxing and striking from the clinch in MMA, and Jake Matthews hit him with a nice clinch uppercut to say, like, I'm here to do that too. And they ended up in an over-under clinch, and Jake Matthews, presumably expecting to get kneed in the gut, timed a lovely Sasai Surikomi-ashi. That foot sweep is so great because, I mean, it takes it into full Muay Thai mode, but if you get the guy kneeing, you can time the sweep and make the sweep more effective. Or you can do the dumb man version of that, which is where you lean your head down next to their knee and say, oh, I hope no one knees me in the head. And then as they knee, you stand up and catch under their leg and just pick them up. But he hit the tasty sweep. And he got on Chidi's back, and Chidi jumped up and started walking towards the fence. And I was going, why are you doing that? I think you'd probably be better fighting that on the ground with him on your back and trying to turn back into him. But, he obviously had a thing that he does in training that he was going to do there. But when I watch guys standing against the fence, just getting tired, fighting off chokes and leaning against the fence, I always think, I think you'd be better served just putting this guy's back on the floor. But great win for Jake Matthews. And then Mike Davies fought Mitch Ramirez, and I think I said on the Boycast, like, where's this guy come from? Why is he in this fight? A guy who's, lost on the Contender Series, came in at short notice against Thiago Moises, and this is how you're repaying him for that. You're giving him a fight against a guy who's probably going to make him look bad. And Mike Davis has had this thing where he disappears for a year, comes back, looks like a murderer, and then disappears for a year. And then he met Fares Ziam back in February, and he looked bad, and he looked worried that he wasn't having just a field day. Normally, he's winning the striking, he's much more powerful than his opponent, and then when he wants to grapple, he wins the grappling. He just looks like a dominating force. And then as soon as he met some adversity against Ziam, he looked really uncomfortable. But this one was just classic Mike Davis. He's just styled on this dude. So I was saying, I think the Contender Series is shit, but if you're going to use it to find guys to make Mike Davis look like the god of violence, I'm all for that. Mike Davis uses the shoulder roll, which we always like. He did a beautiful counter right uppercut to the body, which we love. And he finished this with a lovely flying knee along the fence. He's another one, actually, when I was talking about getting the back on the ground, he does a lot of taking the back on the ground and then getting up on an elbow and coming up onto mount and trying to arm triangle people. Did that to Natan Levy. I think he might have tried to get on top off the back in this fight too. But yeah, it's watch him do it, because it is just, if he gets his elbow back to the floor, he's getting on top. Anyway, that'll do us for today. Not a bad card. I wrote a big article on Jersey Joe Walcott this week because I was not super impressed with the lineup ahead of time. And it's an Advanced Striking 2.0 study, so all doodles by your boy Slacky J. Got an audio track in case you just want to listen to things and look at pictures. That's on the Patreon. Go listen to it. Support the podcast. Be a boy. I'm your boy Jack Slack, and I'll catch you later in the week when we're talking about Dustin Poirier versus Max Holloway 3. For the love of God, cut the Tafa brothers bless.